Have you ever had a moment where time felt like it paused, just enough for your heart to truly hear what it's been trying to tell you all along? That's what happened to me one quiet night. And believe me, I never expected that he, of all people, would be the one to open that door. Before I dive into the story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching us from? Are you in Texas? Maybe Florida? Or one of those cozy towns up north where the trees blaze orange in the fall? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. Now, let me tell you what happened that night, the night that still echoes in my heart. I'm Janet. I turned 76 this spring, though some days I still feel like that girl who danced barefoot in the backyard under the summer rain. Life has taken me through the rough and the beautiful. I've lost a husband, raised 2 kids, and now I find comfort in books, tea, and the quiet rhythm of small things. My home is a modest one, a little white house on the edge of town, where the porch creaks and the kitchen smells like cinnamon and lavender. Nathan is my grandson, 35, tall and gentle in a way that you don't always see in men his age. There's a calmness to him. His voice is never rushed. His eyes hold people like he's listening with his whole soul. We've always been close. He stayed with me after my fall last winter, helping me up and down the stairs, cooking meals I could hardly taste, sitting beside me when the silence got too heavy. That night had been like many others. It was raining softly, the kind of rain that makes you feel cocooned, like the world's wrapped in wool. He was staying over again, as he often did on weekends. The fireplace was lit. The wind rattled the windows gently, and the house smelled like sage and old wood. We just finished dinner, roast chicken, the way my late husband used to like it, and potatoes mashed so smooth they melted on your tongue. Nathan helped me clear the table. I remember his hand brushing mine as we reached for the same dish, warm, steady. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, but it did. Maybe because I noticed something in his eyes, a softness, or maybe a weight he hadn't shared yet. Want to sit with me a while? I asked him as I dried my hands on a dish towel. He nodded, smiling faintly. Yeah, I'd like that. We settled into the living room. The fire crackled low. He sat on the end of the couch, and I curled up in my armchair, a knitted shawl over my shoulders. Outside, the wind was singing through the trees. Inside, everything felt still. At first, we talked about simple things. His job, the latest book I was reading, how fast the garden was growing now that spring had truly arrived. But I sensed he was holding something. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. You've been thoughtful lately, I said gently, looking over at him. He looked at me, surprised, maybe a little unsure. I've had a lot on my mind. You can tell me anything, Nathan. You always could. He looked down, fingers interlaced, elbows resting on his knees. The firelight caught the curve of his jaw and the shadow in his expression. It's strange, he said after a moment, how time changes things. How people drift, even when they don't mean to. I've been thinking a lot about what matters. About connection. About the people who've always been there. I let his words settle. I've lived long enough to know when not to fill the silence. I don't know why I feel so safe here, he said softly, finally glancing up. Like, when I walk in your door, the rest of the world disappears. I can breathe. My heart tugged. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like the words had lived in him too long, waiting for air. I'm glad you feel that way, I replied. We all need a place where we don't have to pretend. There was a long pause, the kind that only happens between 2 people who know how to sit with emotion. I think about my childhood a lot, he continued, and how you were always there, even when everything else was falling apart. You were just a boy, I said. I'm still that boy sometimes. I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. We all are. His eyes met mine then, really met them. And in that moment, something passed between us, not a secret, not a confession, but a knowing. A deep mutual understanding that time had ripened our bond into something richer than memory, more real than habit. He stood and crossed the room, kneeling gently in front of me. His hands rested lightly on my knees. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For always making room for me." I reached for his hand. It was large, warm, calloused from work, but trembling slightly. "You never had to earn your place here, Nathan. It's yours." Something shifted in the air then, a new kind of closeness, not romantic, not familial, even in the traditional sense, but human, raw, honest. He leaned his head against my lap, like he used to do when he was little and frightened by thunder. I smoothed my fingers through his hair, just as I did back then. The silence returned, but this time it was full. I didn't know what the night would bring. I didn't know what would be said or felt next. But I knew that something had changed, not in a sudden, dramatic way, but like the first leaf turning gold at the edge of summer's end. And I wasn't afraid. The fire had burned low, leaving the room in a warm hush of flickering amber light. Nathan was still there on the floor, his head resting gently against my knee, the weight of him grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. His presence was comforting, familiar but newly layered with something neither of us had spoken aloud. I kept running my fingers through his hair, slow and steady. The rhythm seemed to ease something in both of us. Outside, the rain had quieted, the kind of silence that comes only after a storm passes, the world catching its breath. "Nana," he said softly, his voice low and almost childlike. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you ever feel lonely?" I exhaled, surprised by the simplicity and depth of his question. I looked down at him, saw the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It wasn't a question you throw out casually. It came from someplace deep inside. "All the time," I said truthfully. "Even when the house is full of light and I've got the radio on and cookies in the oven. Sometimes the quiet still feels too loud." He nodded like he understood in a way only someone older than his years could. "I do too," he said. "Even when I'm with people, even at work or out with friends. It's like I'm there, but not really." "I think some of us are just built with deeper wells," I murmured, "and they don't fill as easily as others think they should." He turned his face slightly toward me, resting his cheek on the fabric of my skirt. The gesture sent a ripple through me, not because it was improper, but because it felt so open, so rare. We don't often allow ourselves to be this exposed with another person, no matter how close. "I've never told anyone that before," he said. "I'm honored that you did." He sat up slowly, and I let my hand fall away from his hair. He didn't go back to the couch. Instead, he stayed right there, sitting on the floor at my feet, his eyes studying me with a quiet intensity. "You always made me feel like I mattered," he said. "Even when my parents were fighting, even when Dad left, even when I got in trouble at school. You were just there, steady." "I tried to be," I said, my voice catching slightly. "And now I feel like you're the only one who really sees me." There was a weight to those words I hadn't been ready for, and yet they made something inside me settle, like a puzzle piece that had been missing for years, suddenly clicking into place. "You're not invisible to me," I said. "You never have been." He smiled, but there was sadness in it too. The kind that doesn't show up in tears, but in the way someone lowers their shoulders just slightly, as if they've been carrying something too heavy for too long. Nana, do you ever wish you could start over? I paused. That question had sat quietly in my own heart for years, waiting to be asked. Not start over, I said, but sometimes I wish I could go back and just feel things again. Without fear, without holding back. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. I think that's why I keep coming back here, he said. Not just because you make the best sweet tea, or because your porch swing feels like the only place in the world that still makes sense, but because you let me be real. I smiled gently. It's the least I can do. He reached up then, tentatively, and took my hand in his. Not like a child seeking comfort, but like a man seeking truth. There was no awkwardness, just warmth, connection, a kind of mutual remembering of who we were to each other. His thumb moved slowly over the back of my hand, tracing the lines of age and memory like they were sacred. You've aged beautifully, he said. Every line, every mark, it tells a story. I laughed softly. That's one way of saying I'm old. He looked at me earnestly. No, that's one way of saying you've lived. My breath caught again. I wasn't used to being seen like that. Not anymore. Most people see age and stop looking beyond it. But Nathan, he saw the girl, the mother, the woman, and everything in between. I don't know why I'm saying all this tonight, he murmured, still holding my hand. I just feel like, if I don't say it now, I never will. I nodded slowly, then say what you need to. The clock ticked on the mantel. The shadows danced along the walls. And in that moment, it was like we'd stepped out of time. I love you, he said. My heart stilled. He had said those words before, but this time, they were different. He didn't mean them as a grandson to a grandmother. Not entirely. There was something more, something layered, something that trembled with the complexity of what we were feeling. I didn't rush to respond. I looked into his eyes, and I saw him, not just as my grandson, but as a man, complex, searching, tender. I love you too, I said softly, in more ways than I ever expected. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And strangely, it didn't feel strange at all. It felt inevitable. I didn't know where this road was leading. I only knew that night had changed something. Not in a scandalous way. Not in a way that could be judged from the outside. But in a way that was real and true for us. And somehow, that made it okay. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting long golden beams across the wooden floor. The rain had washed everything clean, and the world outside looked new, like it had taken a breath with us the night before. I woke early, as I always do, the way older folks tend to. Years of habit and early breakfasts have their own rhythm. But that morning, something in me stirred differently. There was a warmth, a fullness I hadn't felt in decades. Not just from what had been said, but from what had been felt and understood. I sat at the edge of my bed for a moment, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders, listening. The house was quiet, but I could hear Nathan's steady breathing down the hall. He always slept on the old pull-out in the den, just across from the kitchen, where he claimed the couch had a perfect dip in the middle. I busied myself in the kitchen, hands moving on instinct, cracking eggs, slicing peaches for the jam I'd made last summer, heating the kettle. The simplicity of the tasks kept me grounded. But my thoughts, They floated elsewhere, to last night, to Nathan's voice, his eyes, his confession, and mine. When he finally emerged, hair tousled, shirt wrinkled from sleep, he looked younger somehow, lighter. "Morning," I said gently. He smiled, rubbing his eyes. "You always wake up like this, cooking breakfast like it's a holiday?" "Old habits," I said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "And besides, I like taking care of people I love." There was a pause before he walked up and took the mug from me. His fingers brushed mine again. This time, we didn't pretend it didn't happen. We sat at the small table by the window, the one with a chipped corner and a faded flower vase that had belonged to my mother. Nathan ate in silence at first, but I could see the flickers behind his gaze, the weight of unspoken thoughts. "I hope I didn't say too much last night," he said finally, his voice low. "You didn't," I replied. "You said exactly what you needed to." He looked at me then, not with apology, not with embarrassment, but with something braver, a kind of clarity. "I've never been more honest with anyone." "That's something rare," I said. "And beautiful." We didn't speak for a while after that. The morning was too still, too sacred for chatter. But there was no discomfort. If anything, the silence felt like an embrace neither of us had expected to need. Later, we stepped outside. The porch swing was still damp from the rain, so I laid down an old quilt and we sat side by side. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. Birds sang in the distance, and somewhere a neighbor's wind chime played a lazy tune. "I've been thinking about time," Nathan said after a while. "About how we're taught to believe it always moves in one direction. But sometimes I feel like being with you lets me step out of it for a bit. Like the world slows down." I turned toward him, my hands folded in my lap. "You know what I think?" He looked over. "I think love has no timeline. It doesn't obey rules. It just is. And if we're lucky enough to feel it, really feel it, we should honor it." He took that in, letting the breeze run through his hair. "It scares me sometimes," he admitted. "How natural this feels. How deep it runs." "It scares me too," I whispered. "But not in a way that tells me to stop. In a way that tells me this matters." He reached for my hand again, and I let him. Our fingers intertwined. His grip was gentle but sure, as if he was claiming something he hadn't realized he needed. We didn't talk about the world beyond that porch. We didn't talk about roles or titles or what others might think. That day, just like the night before, belonged to us. As the sun climbed higher, casting warmth across our skin, Nathan turned to me again. "I keep wondering," he said, "what it would have been like if we'd met as strangers. Just 2 souls crossing paths for the first time." I smiled faintly. "I think we would have recognized each other anyway. Some connections run deeper than circumstance." He nodded, his thumb gently brushing across the back of my hand. I believed that. A long stillness followed. We simply were, together, breathing in the same rhythm, feeling something that didn't need to be named to be understood. When the afternoon light softened and the shadows grew longer, Nathan leaned his head against my shoulder. The weight of him there was familiar, comforting, and yet new. Everything was both old and new at once. "Promise me something," he said, eyes closed. "What's that?" "No matter what happens, don't pull away." My throat tightened. I looked out at the horizon, where the trees swayed in the wind, whispering secrets to one another. "I promise," I said, my voice steady. "If you don't." He lifted his head, looked at me again, and in his gaze I saw no confusion, no guilt, only gratitude, only presence. And that's when I realized something important, something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. Love doesn't always come dressed the way we expect. Sometimes it wears the face of someone we thought we already knew. But underneath, it's still love. And it's still worth holding on to. The days that followed unfolded like slow-moving rivers, quiet, steady, with ripples too subtle for the outside world to notice. But within those gentle currents, something profound was shifting between us. Nathan didn't leave that weekend. He stayed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The rhythm of our lives meshed easily. I'd wake early, make breakfast, and find him already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, waiting for me like he belonged there. And maybe he did. We didn't rush into explanations. We didn't label anything. There was no talk of what others might say. It was as if we both instinctively knew some things can't be explained in plain terms, and trying to do so would only cheapen them. We lived in the moments, and we let them breathe. One evening, a few days after that first night, we found ourselves back in the den. The fire again flickered low. The lights were dim. The quiet wrapped around us like a shawl. He was sitting on the couch this time, and I sat beside him, closer than usual. He turned to me, something in his face unreadable at first, serious, but not troubled. "I'd thought about that night," he said. "So have I. Every day since." A pause hung between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted, measured. "Does it frighten you?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "No, but it humbles me." He exhaled slowly. "I was afraid you might regret it." I looked at him fully then. There's nothing to regret when two people are honest with each other, especially when there's love between them. His eyes softened. It's always been there. I think I just didn't know how deep it ran. I reached out, brushing a hand over his cheek. His stubble was rough, but the gesture felt tender, grounded. "Sometimes love lags quietly for years," I said, waiting for the right moment to speak. "And sometimes," he whispered, "it just needs to be heard once, to finally be understood." That night, we didn't do anything more than lean into one another. His arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. We sat like that for a long time, hearing each other's breathing, listening to the pop of the firewood, letting the truth of our connection bloom in the silence. It wasn't about passion. It wasn't about fantasy. It was about something older, deeper, sacred. I had spent most of my life being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's caretaker. My identity was always tied to who I was to others. But in Nathan's presence, I began to feel like someone whole, not just needed, but truly seen. And him, he'd always been the boy who looked out at the world with wonder in eyes. But now, he was the man who found solace not in answers, but in the presence of someone who met him fully without needing him to be anything other than himself. We went to bed in our separate rooms that night, not because we had to, but because we weren't rushing toward anything. What we had didn't demand speed. It asked for patience, care. The next morning, he was in the kitchen before me, making coffee. "You beat me," I said with a smile, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "I wanted to surprise you." He held up a plate of toast, eggs, and fruit arranged carefully. "I remembered how you used to make mine into little faces when I was a kid." I laughed, sitting down. "Well, it's nice to see the tradition carried on." As we ate, there was an easy warmth between us, like a psalm that didn't need lyrics. I've been thinking, he said, after a while, about staying a while longer. I looked at him. Just a while. He smiled. Maybe longer. I've been chasing things for so long, I forgot what it felt like to just be. I nodded. This house has always had room for you. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze holding mine. And your heart. I held that question, let it settle inside me. It's never been closed to you, Nathan. Not for a second. He took my hand across the table again, and we didn't say another word. Because some truths, once spoken, don't need repeating. They echo quietly in the things we do, in breakfast shared, in fireside silences, in hands held across years of understanding. In the days that followed, we didn't speak in terms the world would use. We didn't need to. We simply lived. Together. Present. Rooted in something we both understood, even if no one else ever did. And that, I've come to believe, is more than enough. So if you're out there watching, wondering whether it's ever too late for a new chapter, I'll tell you this. Sometimes the story doesn't start until you finally allow yourself to feel it. And when you do, the ending doesn't matter nearly as much as the beauty of finally turning the page.